Welcome, and thank you for agreeing to speak to us all this afternoon.
Well, it's a pleasure, and of course I like things to be fun. I hope everyone's having fun today. Dry eye isn't a lot of fun, and one couldn't help but be moved by the passion of the first speaker, and it's always nice to hear Dr. Perman. But my role perhaps will be a disruptive one, because I am a believer that there are simple solutions to things, and you're about to hear the journey that I've been on, or that you as patients and providers should be on, because there is something that is common to everyone, and that is everyone eats. So I'm not an ophthalmologist, and I'm not a eye professional in any way, but I am a maternal fetal medicine specialist with now some graduate degrees in clinical nutrition. And my graduate work was devoted to what has the most evidence behind it in terms of the double-blinded randomized placebo-controlled trial. That's the gold standard of evidence in science. And there are over 30,000 studies in all forms of medicine in terms of the benefit and impact of omega-3s on disease, especially chronic disease. So this is the path that I'm going to take you on. But before I go there, I want to highlight something which is really astounding to me when I hear all the dozens and hundreds of treatments for dry eye disease, ocular surface disease. We should all reflect that this wasn't even an official disease until 10 years ago, actually 2010, so 11 years ago. It was a syndrome, and then it became an official disease. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So industry is often driven by confusion. The more confusion, the more commerce. So again, this is not anti-anything. It's just a basic fact of life. So I'm going to offer perhaps a simpler solution. And I said solution, not just treatment of signs and symptoms, but a solution. And as I speak to you now, we have over 25,000 dry eye patients who follow this simple solution for more than 5 years, who have no signs or symptoms, in fact, no dry eye disease. So it is possible to use the word cure, especially because 90% of dry eye disease involves the meibomian gland. So with that as an introduction, let's go to the source of everything in my world, the alpha of the omega. Where did this start? Well, in the 60s, in Sweden has national health care similar to what you all have over there. We don't have in the US of A. Greenland is a province of Denmark. And the doctors in Denmark noted that the Eskimos in Greenland had 100 times less likely occurrence of a heart attack or stroke or any cardiovascular event. They were living in a very primitive culture. You see a picture there of the two doctors who were sent by the government of Sweden, Doctors Bang on the left, Arberg on the right, to study the Inuit Eskimos in Greenland to see why they were so healthy. And they set up a lab there, lived with the Eskimos for 3 years, and they found some amazing things. But as you see the landscape behind the doctors and the Eskimo, it's a glacier. And a glacier is a very difficult place to do things, especially grow crops. So all the food that the Inuits were eating came out of the ocean. And it was certainly a suggestion that marine source nutrition perhaps was the most perfect form of food. What you're seeing here is a picture of Dr. Dyerberg and his wife having a typical Eskimo meal. Various fishes, fish blubber, whale blubber, seal meat, etc., etc. I don't see any fruits and vegetables there, although as a nutritionist, I certainly advocate them. But What was in those ingredients, or those things that you see on the screen, included the nutrients that are found in fruits and vegetables, because fish eat plankton, absorb sunlight, and create the nutrients and the micronutrients that we need for overall health. So this was a typical Eskimo meal. The only thing that's on that slide that shouldn't be there is that bottle of scotch that the Dyerbergs perhaps brought with them from the mainland. So after they completed their study, they found something astounding. The Eskimos had very high levels of omega-3s in their blood. And interestingly, it also created high levels of cholesterol. But yet, when these Eskimos died and they needed to have a post-mortem or an autopsy, and Dr. Spang and Dyerberg performed that service, they found little or no atherosclerosis, little or no cancer, little or no inflammation. So they believed that they perhaps had found something, something that was worth publishing, and it appeared first in 1971 in a British journal, in The Lancet, and this caused all sorts of havoc, because these two doctors were suggesting a simpler solution to cardiovascular disease that might be related to diet. And in fact, those Eskimos had very high levels of cholesterol, but the cholesterol was mostly HDL, which all of you listeners know is the good cholesterol that cleans out the blood vessels and prevents the formation of plaques and even reverses the formation of plaques. So that is the beginning of this story. And I want to now introduce you to a few nutritional terms. Nutraceutical is a real word. It's not just a marketing term. Originally, as doctors, we took an oath, the Hippocratic Oath, and Hippocrates said, "Thy food is thy medicine." So we can take something from food, and if we dose it properly and it's in the right form and we use it long enough, we can get a predictable outcome similar to a drug. The difference is that it takes longer. However, it's much safer, but patients and consumers these days, they want quick solutions, and that's fine. And I'm not against anything that's helpful. We're just suggesting that nutrition should be part of the equation of management of any disease. And it was really dry eye disease that proved the concepts that you're about to hear. So again, going back to that simple solution, we all learned something early on in our education, the notion of Occam's razor, and that is, all things being equal, the simplest solution is the correct one. So perhaps we're overlooking a simpler solution to this problem, at least as part of the way we should be approaching dry eye disease. So let's get back to the future. Remember now that the dry eye disease industry is multi-billions of dollars. And there was something similar a few hundred years ago, and it was the disease of scurvy, a huge enterprise, the most powerful medical industry, if you will, back in the 17th and 18th centuries. And what you're seeing here are the signs and symptoms of scurvy, but originally they were thought to be separate diseases with separate treatments, separate doctors, separate specialists, et cetera, et cetera. And it took a while for people to realize that when sailors went on long sea voyages, they got all of these things at once. And it was I was about to say Dr. Cook, it was actually Captain Cook on one of his circumnavigations of the globe that discovered the cure for scurvy, which was fruits and vegetables. And he came back to England and with a group of doctors presented fruits and vegetables in the treatise to the cure for scurvy. He was scoffed at, laughed at, as were those doctors. And it took 57 years before the evidence presented in this document, which still exists in the British Museum, was embraced. And that's because it disrupted so much commerce. Eventually, those smart Brits figured out that there was a very simple way to deliver the treatment or the cure for scurvy. And you see it there in those lines. And it was now recognized 50 years later that scurvy was a nutritional deficiency disease. And here you see a picture of a ship's doctor administering the one thing, a daily dose of a daily dose of lime juice to prevent scurvy or cure it, that would eliminate all of those signs and symptoms. And here is a land-based specialist who realizes I might be out of business because it can't be this simple. There were hundreds of treatments for scurvy at this time, and yet with the daily administration of lime juice, scurvy was cured. This actually resulted in the passage of a law in Britain which said that every sailor should get a daily dose of lime juice, but any sailor who revealed the secret to the cure for scurvy would be hung. And that was because that little lime became a weapon of mass destruction. If sailors don't get scurvy, they're better sailors. The ships can stay out longer, get upwind, and win many sea battles. And with that secret, Britannia ruled the waves for 150 years and built the largest empire in the history of the world. Of course, it wasn't just that one thing, but this was certainly a big reason and why the British Navy was so all-powerful, because the British sailors did not get scurvy. Now, in my life as a maternal fetal medicine specialist, I was faced with something similar. In the late 20th century, we had a tsunami of birth defects that appeared very suddenly. These were horrible. Babies born with incomplete spinal cord, spina bifida, babies born without brains. This was a 1 in 25,000 to 50,000 birth occurrence, and then started appearing much more frequently. And it happened so suddenly, we thought there must be some genetic mutation that happened, a whole bunch of things. There was a panoply of reasons given for this sudden increase in birth defects. But it turned out to be the lack of an essential vitamin, folic acid. For me, with all my training, I didn't even know what folic acid was, which is why I went back to school. But it turned out that because food was now being processed and people stopped eating foods that contained B vitamins like dark breads, whole grains, green leafy vegetables, and were eating fast foods and processed foods, we had a resultant epidemic of birth defects. And it was based on the lack of an essential nutrient, in this case, vitamin B9 or folic acid. And when you see the reduction of this type of problem, 70% reduction in 2 years, you know that that's not genetic. That's not complicated. It was from one reason, and that was the lack of an essential nutrient. And now in the US, it is mandated that folic acid be added back to food, that women who are pregnant get folic acid supplementation, even women considering pregnancy. The EU and the UK have also adopted this, and this problem of birth defects of the most horrible form have disappeared. So is it possible that something like this is going on in the 21st century that's food related? Well, we are in the presence now of certainly a pandemic. I don't have to remind anyone of that. The definition of a pandemic or an epidemic is usually a multi-system or multi-organ disease with one etiology. Before the COVID epidemic, and presently we're still dealing with things like this, which are increasing, and certainly increasing with age, a chronic systemic disease epidemic. And as Dr. Perman so eloquently stated, many of these diseases are based on long-term chronic inflammation. And I would suggest, just like with the scurvy epidemic, perhaps all of these things are related to one thing, and the decreased visual function component of this hypothetical epidemic is what I'm going to be addressing today, because it has been manifested by the appearance of these two diseases, ocular surface disease or dry eye disease and age-related macular degeneration, which were not even on the top 10 list 50 years ago. Again, as an OBGYN lots of issues of dryness. I know people weren't looking at as many screens, but they were looking at TV and lots of air conditioning and all the other things that we attribute to dry eye. And yet these issues of eye dryness did not exist until very recently. And macular degeneration was not even on the top 10 list. So now it's the #1 cause of blindness. So could this possibly be something that's related and based on nutrition? So now we need to talk about essential nutrients. These are the things that you must get in your diet on a daily, regular, consistent basis in the right dose and form, either by eating it or supplementing it, because your body needs it for normal physiologic function. And if you don't get it, something bad is going to happen. Your body cannot make it or store it. The top is how we used to eat. In the States, 100 years ago, 1/3 of us were farmers. We ate what we grow. We ate what we grew, what we cultivated. It was in beautiful colors and forms, as you see there at the top. That's a farmer's market that I took a picture of. And the picture at the bottom is the typical place people often go shopping for their food when they're filling their gas tank. But now we have in the States 3 million farmers as part of agribusiness feeding the 330 million people. And they're doing that by creating food that's inexpensive, lasts a long time, is full of a number of things that are artificial and lacking in a number of essential nutrients. So many things like these have occurred as a result of the evolution of our food industry, certainly fast food nation, ultra sweetening of food, saturated fats versus polyunsaturated fats, but the proliferation of these brands throughout the world, especially the Western world, has brought along with it this chronic systemic disease epidemic based on inflammation, because these foods are loaded with omega-6s. Omega-6s are essential fatty acids. You need them to start inflammation, which starts healing. And they're present in those foods, but ultimately we have to turn this off. Otherwise, inflammation remains and unfortunate things happen. We are intended, as a basic rule of nature, to have things in balance. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I would love to try to get people to stop eating those things on the right, but I can't. So the other alternative is to balance the scale through nutritional therapy. Yes, I would love to feed people that pristine piece of fish every day that they would need to overcome the results of the other side of the diet. But that's very expensive and it's hard to find clean fish these days. So we can do that with supplementation of omega-3s, which are anti-inflammatory, but it must be in the right dose and in the right form. We only know omega-3s from how we were exposed to it as a species, and that is from marine sources in triglyceride form. So let's talk about essential fatty acids quickly. There's three major ones in each group. Look at the bottom. You see omega-6s, no shortage of that, especially because processed food contains vegetable oils. Look at your granola bar, pull up that label or that package flap, and you'll see palm oil or corn oil or partially hydrogenated soybean oil. These are the major sources of omega-6s, which is why we have such an inflamed society, because this is in everything. Notice also that gamma-linolenic acid, which is often found in dry eye products, is an omega-6. That is unrefuted. It is programmed to cause inflammation. In certain circumstances, it can be anti-inflammatory if people are in balance. But when patients are given dry eye products with GLA in them, we're just adding to their omega-6 burden. On the top, you see the sources of omega-3s, and vegetarianism and veganism seems to be very popular these days. But as a species, we stopped foraging for food long ago, especially when we figured out how to catch up to the dinosaurs and eat them. and then catch up to the fish and eat them. So we lost our ability to process plant-based omegas. In fact, the only omega-3s that work for humans are EPA and DHA from marine sources. That means triglyceride form. So again, for every action, equal and opposite reaction. So we need inflammation to start the healing cascade coming from these sources, and we need an off switch, omega-3s coming from marine sources to turn things off. And if I don't have enough of those omega-3s, that fire, which may begin in the eyes, will wind up everywhere. So you can see where I'm going now, everyone. This perhaps is at least one potential reason for this chronic systemic inflammatory disease epidemic. Now, we sell throughout the world billions of dollars of flax oil, and we sell it for omega-3 benefit. You see here a typical product with alpha-linolenic acid in it. That is the plant-based omega-3. But we've known since 2001 that alpha-linolenic acid does not work. There's the seminal study right there. We don't need to go into that. We can do that later. But 2001, we know for 20 years that this does not work as an omega-3 source, an efficient omega-3 source. But it didn't stop marketing and sales of flax oil. So as a nutritionist, what we learn about flax, and I have flax every day, flax meal. Flax seeds can't be digested, so you need flax meal. But flax, the acronym or the moniker that we learn, the F is for fiber. That's wonderful. Lignans, or the L, those are anti-cancer things, especially for breast and prostate. The A for antioxidants, and the X for no omega value. So those of you who might be using flax oil as your source of omega-3s, you need to reconsider that. If you want to use a plant-based source of omega-3s, it should come from algae. And then you're getting EPA and DHA from an algae source, just like the fish do. And recently, what we've learned, we know biochemically that alpha-linolenic acid and gamma-linolenic acid taken over time can have pro-inflammatory potential. The expert on this is Emily Chu and her Eyelid study. You've heard all about this. A powerful nutritional study, two of them actually, done over 12 years, showing the connection to the lack of certain nutrients and the development of macular degeneration. She recently published, just a few months ago, a final version, some people are calling this Pt.3, mentioning all of the things that were beneficial for prevention of occurrence and progression of macular degeneration. You see them on the left there in blue. You see all the things in her formulation. You see B vitamins, which are also found in dark breads, whole grains, as I said, along with lutein and zeaxanthin, and you see omega-3s there. What you see as harmful or something that might cause or accelerate the progression of AMD are things like alpha-linolenic acid and other omega-6s similar to GLA. So I don't think I want to give a patient nutritionally something that might potentially increase their risk of age-related macular degeneration or the severity of it if they already have it. Now take a look at how much money we invest in this epidemic of chronic systemic inflammation. There's an article that was published on the right connecting all the dots. This actually was published in 2004, before dry eye became a disease. So it wasn't included, but AMD was included along with cancer, heart attacks, Alzheimer's disease, all related to chronic systemic inflammation. In the States, we spend almost 20% of our GNP on healthcare. In the UK, and where a number of you are listening, almost 10% of your money from your national budget is spent on healthcare. That's a pretty big investment. So how can I measure that return on investment? How about how long you live? Japan is pretty high up there too, 11%, but look at the return on investment they get in terms of longevity. Interestingly, this is just one reason. The Japanese consume fish with just about every meal. other than the Eskimos, the Japanese have the highest omega-3 levels of any culture on the planet. And you see probably the top 10 or so in terms of longevity. But the UK, unfortunately, even though it spends 10% or so of GNP on healthcare, it ranks 22 in terms of longevity. And the States, we do not have any national healthcare, unfortunately. We spend a lot of money on healthcare, but we rank 28th out of 40. So here is the atomic particle of the universe I am describing, the nucleus of which is omega-3 deficiency, and whatever electron disease I spin around that, it is inflammatory in nature. And when we attack the eye inflammatory cluster with an omega-3 systemic therapy, we get a wonderful outcome. And I know I'm perhaps running a little longer, but I'm almost done. So let's attack that eye inflammatory cluster and cause a code green. And when your patients come back, or when you come back and report that your dry eye symptoms are better because of systemic omega-3 therapy and the right dose and form, you will also be reporting that your joints feel better, your mood is better. Anywhere where inflammation exists in your body will be improved because the omega-3 has put the fire out. We call this omega anemia. This perhaps is the epidemic of the 21st century, approved by the CDC as the 6th leading cause of preventable death back in 2009. So even the cardiologists had to recognize that it wasn't genetic, because Japanese men, when they came to America and started eating our diet, all of a sudden we're at the same cardiovascular risk as the rest of Americans. This comes from the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. So, okay, plants and nuts aren't going to do it. Fish is often contaminated, so that's tough. So the best way, perhaps, to get your omega-3s is from a dietary supplement that is purified in the proper form. That is a reesterified triglyceride form. That would be what you'd get from a pristine piece of fish. Now, how does this apply to the eye? In fact, what do I know about the eye as a nutritionist? It was dry eye disease that helped us focus this theory. So here is a perfect tear. The tear is the #1 refractive surface of the eye, lubricates the eye. Every time you blink, you are lubricating your eye if your meibomian glands are functional, because that outer layer of the tear, the lipid layer, is composed of fats, and many omega-3s and omega-6s there. Hopefully that's in balance. And you can see that the lipid layer protects everything beneath it. There is a cross-section of the eyelid. Meibomian glands are identical to sebaceous glands. When people are in omega balance and their meibum is in omega balance, so are their sebaceous glands, which is why we see patients who are in omega balance being supplemented with the right dose and form of omega-3s do not get rosacea or have a reversal of rosacea and acne and other skin-related problems. Now, this is a severe form of meibomian gland disease. 90% of dry eye is based on the fact that the meibomian glands are in this shape. People have described this as a row of pimples. In fact, those are block glands, pretty severe case of meibomian gland disease and dry eye disease here. And we now, as I said, a disease that didn't even exist now has tens of millions of people that have it. And what proves the notion of an epidemic is, while older people do have it, we are seeing this in younger and younger people. So we now have wonderful diagnostic tools that I know Dr. Perman is using. The best one is meibography. We can actually look at the patient's glands with this technique and let them see exactly what's going on. So at the top, there's a good one. That's someone with no meibomian gland disease. In the middle, it's getting pretty bad, and at the bottom, it's very bad. And you would think this would take a lot of time to happen, a lot of screen time, a lot of all the things that are attributed to dry eye. But in this particular person that was having LASIK, There is a bad meibomian gland situation at 22 years old. They could have been looking at a lot of screens, I get it, but those glands are a reflection of what's going on systemically. That is a cellular secretion secreted by sebocytes that are inflamed and out of balance. Here's another picture, pretty bad. In fact, those glands are almost gone. This happens to be in a 10-year-old. A 10-year-old who eats McDonald's every day. So those glands, and meibomian gland disease certainly can be a reflection of the diet. These actually look pretty good. So I imagine this is a person who's pretty young and perhaps has had a pretty good diet. Well, this person is me. That's me. I'm 74 years old. And I do not have any meibomian gland disease, and I don't have a number of the other things. Now, I don't use anecdotal information as evidence. I just want to show you what can happen. So as I conclude, meibomian gland disease is a reflection of omega balance in the meibum. If I correct that toothpaste will turn to olive oil. Or olive oil consistency. We've seen this in thousands of patients. Please evacuate the glands, whatever methods are needed to keep the person comfortable, because this is going to take a couple of months, and it takes 2 to 3 grams a day of reesterified triglyceride omega-3 to overcome that imbalance in the diet. But when you do that, you will see a miraculous improvement in your patients and your own dry eye issues, because, as I said, we are correcting one of the biggest problems related to dry eye disease, and that is meibomian gland disease. And I will conclude with that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gross. So much useful information to share, and so much for us to think about with what we eat and the benefits of omega-3.